Ready? 5, 4, 3. Oh, it's already on. Awesome. Hello. Hello, everyone. I wish you a good day, a good afternoon, and a good evening. Welcome to the final spun Virtual High School Debate Tournament 2025. Today, we are here live in ISTC, and welcome to all of our audience. Today, our judge will be Andrew Dudowicz, who will be giving us feedback and announcing the winner at the end of the debate. Andrew Dudowicz graduated from University of Michigan and has judged the spun debates for the last 2 years. He recently completed an honors program autocratic regimes interact with political protesters. By judging these debates, his goal is to engage students from all over the world in conversations about the space industry and space exploration. I am the moderator, and Oana is also going to be moderating with me. My name is Apurva, and I would like to read the following statement to you. The winning team is chosen based on their skill and effort and not on any preset NSS position. NSS clearly believes that humanity should continue to explore, develop, and settle space. However, NSS also believes that open, honest debate will facilitate that goal. It is important that space advocates understand and be able to express the anti space case. No statement made by any debater is an official position of NSS. All right, let's meet our debaters. Can we have them back on, please? Our affirmative position is held by Team Chromium. Chromium's hardness, wear resistance, and ability to protect against corrosion makes it valuable for coating components used in space exploration, like in space hardware. Additionally, chromium's natural lubricity and heat resistance are crucial for reliable performance in harsh space environment. The team is coached by Thomas Maple, who is an assistant professor at Santa Fe College, and he holds an MS in International and Intercultural Communication. Professor Maple is the Santa Fe College speech coordinator. He has been with the SPUN program for 2 years, and he resides in Florida, USA. Team Chromium, please give us your name and the country you're representing.
Hello, I'm Alexandra and I'm representing Romania.
I'm Will.
I'm Paul and I'm representing Canada.
I'm Crescent. I'm representing Indonesia.
Awesome. Now let's meet the negative team, Team Titanium. Titanium, a valuable metal found in some asteroids, is used in space due to its high strength to weight ratio, excellent corrosion resistance, and ability to withstand extreme temperatures. These properties make it ideal for use in spacecraft construction, launch vehicles, and various space related applications. This team is coached by Tammy Ruda, who is returning for her 4th year as a coach in the SPUN debates. She has also been coaching Lincoln Douglas debates in Massachusetts, USA for 8 years, and was a Lincoln Douglas debater herself. A huge fan of Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and Brahe, Tammy earned her bachelor's degree in the history of science with a focus on history of astronomy from Harvard University. In her professional life, Tammy is a fundraising consultant, providing guidance, training, and assistance to colleagues, universities, and other nonprofits so that they can secure financial resources they need to accomplish their important societal missions. Team Titanium, please give us your name and the country you're representing.
My name is Gauri and I'm representing India.
My name is Ivan and I'm representing India.
My name is Maria and I'm representing Romania.
My name is Charles and I'm representing the United States.
Awesome. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand in your participants icon on your screen. Please mute your mic unless you're speaking, and only the presenting team and judge should turn on their videos unless directed otherwise by the moderator. Our debating format today follows the same format as in the practice tournaments and the previous debates. All right.
Thank you, Apurva. Hello, everyone. My name is Wana, and today I'm going to be moderating the actual debate. So let's get started. An international body should establish a framework for the utilization of space minerals. It's the 2025 SPUN High School Resolution. We'll hear from the first speaker from Team Chromium, representing the affirmative position. Team Chromium, your first speaker may begin your affirmative intro. You have 4 minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Alexandra Fekete, and I am the first affirmative speaker. I would like to start by thanking the judge, moderator, timekeeper, and opposing team for your time, attention, and dedication to making this debate possible. Today, Team Chromium affirms a resolution: an international body should establish a framework for the utilization of space minerals. Before we proceed, I would like to introduce my team and outline our roles in today's debate. I will address the critical importance of international regulation in preventing conflicts. Following me, will explain how the framework can offer flexibility and why governments regulate better than companies do. Finally, Paul will deliver a rebuttal and Krishna will conclude with a summary of our case. To ground our discussion, we'll first clarify essential terms. According to NSS Space Age website, an international body is an organization or institution that operates on a global scale and involves the participation of multiple countries. This body would have the authority and legitimacy to create and enforce rules, guidelines, and standards related to the extraction and reuse of the resources found in space. Establishing implies a process of creation, implementation, and enforcement of a structured system for governing use of space minerals. A framework refers to a structured and comprehensive system of rules, guidelines, and principles that will govern how space resources are extracted, used, and managed. Utilization is the process of extracting, processing, and applying space based resources for various purposes. Space minerals refer to naturally occurring solid materials with a defined chemical composition and crystal structure found on celestial bodies like asteroids, the moon, and other planets. Universalization is the next phase of human development, making the transition from nation states to a single worldview of humanity where all individuals are treated fairly, without regard to nation of origin, race, sexual orientation, and physical and mental ability. With these terms established, we can now turn to why an international framework is crucial for preventing conflicts. In today's debate, we ground our case in the principle of universalization. We argue that an international framework is the best way to uphold justice, sustainability, and cooperation. It reflects the values the world should commit to, guiding activity in space for everyone's benefit. History shows that without international regulation, competition over valuable resources leads to conflict, making a universal framework vital as space mining begins. The late 19th century scramble for Africa illustrates this. European powers competed fiercely to exploit the continent's resources, fueling war, exploitation, and tensions, made worse by the lack of binding agreements. While space lacks borders and population, the principle still applies. If powerful actors make their own rules, justice and peace are undermined. We're now entering a similar phase in space, where real actors are investing real money into real missions. In February 2025, AstroForge launched a $6.5 million mission to explore asteroid 2022 OB5 for platinum group metals. Common Plus, another startup, plans to extract resources not for Earth but to build infrastructure in space. This isn't theoretical anymore. Private companies are moving ahead, but each one plays by its own rules, or not at all. As interest grows, so will tensions, especially if no universal baseline exists to regulate claims and behavior. To prevent this, we must act now, not wait for problems to arise. Fortunately, we have models that show international cooperation can succeed. The Antarctic Treaty demilitarized the continent, froze territorial claims, and ensured peaceful scientific cooperation. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty declared that space is not subject to national appropriation and must be used peacefully in the interest of all countries. While these treaties didn't cover commercial mining, they established principles that kept space peaceful. Of course, the question remains: how would such a framework be enforced? A body like the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs could issue licenses requiring registration, audits, and environmental standards. Violators could face penalties, losing licenses, or access to global markets. In conclusion, we are standing at the edge of a new industrial revolution in space, but progress without principle risks peril. Do we want asteroid mining to become a race for the few or a shared opportunity
Thank you
for
very
all?
much.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Now we begin a 3 minutes prep time for the negative team to prepare the cross-ex. If the negative team is already ready, please indicate to me and we will proceed. While you are speaking, please open up your camera. There, thank you. Now, speaker negative one of Team Titanium, please begin your 2 minutes cross-ex of affirmative one.
Thank you. So my first question is, you talked about the Outer Space Treaty, right? So how would an international body run on a treaty that was written around decades ago? And you talk about universalization. How would it adapt to the ideas of universalization?
Well, first of all, I want to say that what we are planning to do in space will be and has to be way much better than what we've done on Earth. The Outer Space Treaty is
Okay,
just,
I'd like to move on. Okay, so you said that you can just yes or no. Do you agree that international bodies are effective?
yes, they can be very
Okay,
effective.
no, it was just a yes or no question. So, if international bodies are effective, you stated the example of the United States, I mean, United Nations, sorry. So, if it's really truly effective, there are still wars that are happening that it's not able to solve. So, what is your take on that?
Could you please say the last part again? I didn't quite catch it.
The United Nations, if it's really truly effective, why did it fail to prevent the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, I'm not saying that the UN is perfect. What I'm saying is that the UN is a model, and if we're moving to
Model,
space,
because the UN goes under the ideas of the veto powers. Are you aware of the veto powers?
what I want to say right here is that once
Okay.
again,
I'd like to move on to my next question. So, you plan to take every country with centuries of conflicts and competition and ask them to hold hands and share peace.
what we want is to ensure not necessarily not only equality but the same
You didn't
chance.
get my question. You didn't get my question. Would you I mean, your idea is to take every country with centuries of conflicts and competition and distrust and make them join an international body and hold hands.
Well, it's not about holding hands. It's about trying to make a better place for humanity. It's
So,
about trying.
how would countries who have conflicts and competition among themselves, be ready to be part of this body and share their resources?
Well, the thing is, we should try and find a common place. Like somehow we should try
So
and
you're
make.
going to just wait. You're just gonna wait to find a common ground and keep all the
Thank
progress.
you.
And
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. And now your opening argument, speaker negative one of Team Titanium for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, esteemed judges and fellow debaters. My name is Gauri, and I'm the first negative speaker. And today, we, Team Titanium, negate the resolution. An international body should establish a framework for the utilization of space minerals. We accept the definitions which were put forward by the affirmative team, but I would like to define a few key terms. Universalization. The Getty-Combe Dictionary defines universalization as the process of making something universal or acceptable or applicable to all cases, groups, or situations. Framework, as defined by the Cobreeves Legal Glossary, is a system of laws, regulations, policies, and legal principles that govern a particular area of activity or organization. Today, we aim to demonstrate that an international body should not establish a framework for the utilization of space minerals because innovation thrives in co-opetition, not in framework. And international bodies are not fair. Private companies increase accessibility and universalization. Coming to my first argument, frameworks hinder innovation and co-opetition. A rigid international framework would just slow down innovation and co-opetition, which is both critical in today's economy. We do not believe in outright rivalry, but in co-opetition, where private companies compete and collaborate simultaneously. This drives innovation, lowers costs, and expands access. For example, during the COVID 19, we all went through it, but the world needed a vaccine as quickly as possible. Two private companies, Pfizer and BioNTech, cooperated and to develop one of the first successful COVID 19 vaccines. Bringing the vaccine to the market quickly saved numerous lives. Also noted by the Open University Business School 2021, new biotechnology firms are more innovative when they ally with larger pharmaceutical companies for commercialization. Dr. Richard Wharton, in his Lancet 2021 article, also emphasizes that vaccine rollout success did not come from regulation, but came from private market efforts and company-to-company coordination. The companies, in fact, had to work under the confusing and delayed regulatory frameworks. This evidence shows that private companies cooperated with each other, in turn increased innovation. An article by Martin Russell for the European Parliament May 2020 stated that the World Health Organization, an internationally well-known organization, underperformed during the earlier stages of COVID-19. They accepted China's claims that the virus would not spread between humans and ignored Taiwan's earlier signals due to political pressure. They gave confusing advice against masks and travel bans. Powerful nations like China dominated the WHO. Similarly, the IMF's funding, the International Monetary Fund's funding system, gave more power to the wealthier nations, marginalizing the poorer nations. This is not universalization. The truth is, when universalization is only meaningful when every actor has an equal opportunity, not just the wealthiest. When decisions are made globally, access becomes limited to the countries with the most resources and power. Based on these examples, we can clearly see that an international space mining body would also most likely let powerful nations to dominate. The chief of research in civil society sustainable research group at the University of Technology, Lithuania, states that despite the normative appeal of a multilateral and equitable regime for space resources, the political and structural condition render its formation highly implausible. As we have demonstrated through this speech, it does not, in international body, even if it is created, it will never function in an equitable way, which is required to achieve universalization. In conclusion, we have demonstrated that having a rigid international framework will just stifle innovation, while co-opetition, which is a real market-driven collaboration, will fuel progress. In theory, the international body sounds fair, but then when it comes to practical life, it will be slow, biased mechanism driven by the powerful nations with the most resources. In contrast, co-opetition already exists and thrives in the real world. Also, coming to the point what the affirmative team stated, they talked about the Antarctic Treaty, but the truth is, the Antarctic Treaty was kind of like a regulation barrier, which what it did is that to this date, there has not been one mineral which has been mined from the Antarctic Treaty. So, what it did is not protect the countries or protect resources. In fact, it banned all nations from getting use from those resources. So, is this really universalization where nobody has access? What we talked about, the system of a free market and competition, enables everybody to have an equal opportunity and succeed, which is basically the real application of universalization. Now, further, my teammates will provide you with evidence to support these arguments. For these reasons, we urge the judge to vote for negative. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, affirmative 1 of chromium, please start your cross-ex of negative 1. You are allotted 2 minutes.
My first question is, can you name a major technological field that has no regulation and where everything came out okay? Do you have any examples of this?
Well, first thing I would like to say is we are not against regulation. What we are saying is that we do not want regulation in an international body. Rules are important, but not through an international body which will have bureaucracy and red tape all over it, which would slow innovation. A free market is basically would have some rules like what is said in the Artemis Accords, and so and so.
Thank you so much. Now, my next question is, okay, you say you don't want international regulation. Well, I suppose you want national regulation, do you? Or what kind of regulation do you want if international is not good enough for you?
We're not talking about national regulation. We are talking about kind of rules that everybody okay with. But in fact, it would not be under an international body where everybody has to, it's not. We propose a system of co-opetition, which is basically where companies collaborate at the same time they compete. So companies can choose who they want to collaborate, which would ultimately benefit them.
Okay, so you basically want a set of rules that everybody agrees with, an
Not
international set of
really,
rules.
not really, not really. What I try to say is that I'm not sure if you know about the Artemis Accords. It's something that talks about the property rights or some basic agreement, but it's not going to be an international body. In an international body, countries have to agree upon. There would be one entire rule that everybody has to agree upon, or everyone has to cooperate with. There will be bureaucracy, but in an international body, countries, not just countries. I mean, companies can have their own frameworks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My last question, or one of my last. How do you prevent conflict if you do not want international regulation? How do you prevent conflict and war over space resources?
Well, actually, I have not mentioned this in my speech, but then conflicts happen today with the existence of bodies like the UN. For example, there are even people dying because of war, and not one international body is able to. There's been 40-month-long wars, but no international body, the so-called United Nations, nothing is working right now. So, do we really think an international body is going to stop conflict?
Thank you.
But do you agree that we should try to do
Thank you.
something? Okay. Thank you.
Now, affirmative 2 of chromium offers the second argument for the affirmative team. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to get right into it. One of the most significant problems that arises without an international regulatory framework for the extraction of space minerals is the need to compel corporations to act in the best interest of humanity, rather than self-interest. Corporations have a history of being unable to self-regulate for the greater good. Throughout world history, profit-motivated corporations have proven themselves unable to self-regulate altogether. There are countless examples of this. In the absence of government regulation, company towns in the 19th century in the United States, for industries like coal mining and logging, would pay individuals in something called company scrip, which was currency that could only be exchanged for goods at company shops, effectively making anyone that lived in the town slaves to the company, as all of their income would eventually be returned to the company just in order for them to survive. Another more modern example of this is the unscrupulous exploits of Nestle, a multinational food and drink company. Because there was no international governing body regulating them, Nestle would send employees dressed as nurses to hospitals in underdeveloped countries to preach the benefits of Nestle's baby formula. These nurses would give families free samples that were no longer free once they left the hospital. This usually meant that the mother stopped being able to breastfeed by that time, forcing the family to buy baby formula or risk malnutrition or death for their newborn. One more example of this is climate change. According to an article by Georgetown University, oil company executives have known since 1959 that there was a connection between the use of fossil fuels and climate change. And, quote, soon thereafter, industry scientists confirmed beyond a reasonable doubt that the burning of fossil fuels contributed to anthropogenic climate change, end quote. Climate change would not only be detrimental to the human species as a whole, but also the very business that these oil companies were presumably trying to protect when concealing this information. For an example that's more closely related to the space industry, SpaceX, one of the industry's largest companies, has numerous outstanding OSHA violations. According to Reuters, they're not only responsible for over 600 injuries, but also one known death that occurred despite previous OSHA warnings. This represents both a failure of a corporation to regulate itself and of a nation to regulate a corporation. Now that it is clear that corporations cannot be trusted to act in humanity's best interest when it conflicts with their own self-interest, I will explain why we need an international framework rather than another system. In the present day, corporations often subvert national level regulations by simply moving operations to a country with looser regulations. For example, countries that are known to be tax havens are often the site of corporate headquarters for their low taxes, so the corporations don't need to pay as much. If we were to leave the regulation of these corporations to individual countries, we would simply see corporations operate out of whatever country has the loosest regulations. A regulatory framework for human activity in space could even take the form of a simple declaration of ideals, laying out a set of principles for human activity in space and establishing a basis for future legislation rather than being a comprehensive piece of legislation itself. Even this will be better than leaving regulation to corporations or individual countries. Many successful countries and international organizations today, such as the US and France, as well as the EU, have their legal systems founded on a foundational document like a constitution or treaty that establishes a set of ideals and basic legal principles while allowing for future elaboration. This shows that the barrier for the establishment of an international regulatory framework is very low, and that there are virtually no downsides to taking steps to ensure its establishment. These pieces of evidence, when considered together, suggest that corporations are both unwilling and unable to self-regulate for the greater good of their consumers and employees in the absence of an intergovernmental system to keep them in check, and that the establishment for the most basic form of such a system can come in the form of something as simple as a declaration of ideals. The fact that taking steps towards creating an international framework can be so simple, combined with the unreliability of corporations and the struggles of national regulations to govern them, shows that it only makes sense to encourage an international framework for the for the regulation of space mineral extraction. An international framework for the utilization of space minerals will be in the best interest of not only individual nations, but also the ideal of universalization and humanity as a whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's now hear negative 2 of Team Titanium in a 2 minutes cross-examination. Team Titanium will begin the cross-ex.
You mentioned a lot about international bodies being effective, but why was there no actions or no responsibility taken place when China destroyed its own satellite and created over 3,000 pieces of space debris? Why did international frameworks fail to enforce any action?
I'm not aware of any legislation that makes it illegal for China.
Sorry, can you repeat your answer?
I'm not aware of any international legislation that makes it illegal for China to take such an action. Often, when nations or individuals
China has signed
nations
the
take
Outer Space Treaty.
unprecedented action,
I would like to continue. China has signed the Outer Space Treaty, which is the largest international organization for space. And furthermore, do you agree that companies have a
I'm sorry.
incentive?
Could you repeat yourself? You. I'm sorry. Could you repeat yourself? You cut out for me. I'm sorry. I may be having audio issues. It may be wise to pause the timer on the process.
Do you believe that companies want to make a
I'm
profit?
sorry. Could you repeat?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. I do believe the companies
Do you
want to make
believe that companies want to make a profit?
Yes, yeah, I heard that.
Okay,
Companies want
good.
to make.
Now, do you agree that if they fail to
Yes.
meet safety, quality, or performance standards, they lose customers and revenue? Yes or no,
I
please?
think that SpaceX has proven that to be false. Uh,
There's no
I think
example
that
of that. In fact,
SpaceX
SpaceX
is.
has environmental pollution with reusable rockets. And my next question is: you agree that companies want a profit, and doesn't that mean private companies would be incentivized to perform well, stay safe, and earn public trust in order to survive, whereas an international framework would have no such
Thank you. Thank you.
intensive?
Thank you. Your time is up. Let's hear from negative two from Team Titanium your second argument. You're allotted 4 minutes.
Okay. A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to the esteemed judges, moderators, and my fellow debaters. I am Vivan from Team Titanium and I stand in firm negation of the resolution being discussed today. Team Titanium believes that universalization is a direct result of innovation, and innovation is exactly what private companies do best. International frameworks are shackled by slow, inefficient decision making, as proved by negative one. In contrast, and better, they drive costs down, expand access, and create opportunities for the masses. This brings me to Titanium's second argument for today. International frameworks make progress slower and more expensive, making it difficult to achieve universalization. NASA, the largest space government that is framework-led enterprise, recognized that political frameworks kill progress. In 2016, NASA's EVA spacesuit project was already 20 months over schedule and $200 million over budget. Realizing the inefficiencies of a government-run program, they launched a $3.5 billion contract for any private corporation to create a spacesuit for them. Private companies, on the other hand, created spacesuits faster, better, and cheaper. I will now address something paramount to our case. Who ensures that private companies innovate? The public market does. In a free market, profit comes from progress. If companies do not improve, they fail. So private companies are pushed to innovate, not by rules, but to survive. International frameworks just don't work the same way. With no profit motive, they waste time at political table instead of driving real breakthroughs. This delays progress, access, and universalization. Private companies, by contrast, depend on public trust. They simply cannot afford to act unfairly or monopolistically. They have an incentive, which is to build faster and better for everyone, which means more universalization. And we have evidence for this too. Seat belts, one of the most life-saving car technologies, was introduced voluntarily by Volvo, a private company, in 1959. Not because the international framework demanded it, but because the company valued safety and reputation first, which allowed them to make more profits. Just imagine how efficiently space minerals could be utilized by innovation-led bodies instead of slow-moving frameworks. Titanium's third argument for today is international bodies claim to promote fairness, but they let the most powerful nations control the rules. The International Monetary Fund, the world's biggest banking body, is a clear example of this fraudulent system. The IMF's voting power is tied directly to its financial contributors. The US alone, a single nation, holds 16.5% of the vote, while the entire African continent has 6.5, despite having a population 22 times greater. This proves that international frameworks should not act fairly in space. Next, refuting what Affirmative once said, the largest defense body, the UN Security Council, has just 5 out of 15 nations with veto power. It allows them to block any decision that threatens their interest, no matter how many other countries support it. This is literally dictatorship disguised under an international body. A global mining framework would operate the same way, ensuring that the wealth of space is controlled by a few and is never really open to all. On November 28, 2024, the US used its veto power to disband the call for an immediate ceasefire in the ongoing war of Gaza. The US was the only nation against the motion. Their sole control over the veto power has now caused death and homelessness for over 48,000 people. Just imagine the atrocities similar fraudulent frameworks could commit in space. Our fourth argument for today is private companies improve universalization, reducing costs and improving accessibility. Today, SpaceX, a private company, has reduced launch costs from $15,400 with NASA's new space launch system to just $2,700 with their Falcon 9. Their reusable rockets have also greatly reduced environmental damage. Virgin Galactic, another private company, has pioneered space tourism for 2 entire decades before any government or framework led organization stepped into the competition. The International Telecommunications Union is another example. It took them 2 decades to regulate a global internet infrastructure. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Starlink and Eutelsat's OneWeb rapidly expanded satellite networks, bringing connectivity to even the most remotest regions of Earth, hence boosting universalization by involving everyone. Private companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab have already created rocket launch infrastructure for developing nations like Bangladesh and Turkmenistan. They've proved that private bodies already work. They foster universalization better, and they've helped out developing nations
Thank
by
you.
lowering costs. With this, I would like to end
Thank
my
you.
speech. Thank you.
Time is up. Thank you. Now, Team Chromium, please start your 2 minutes of a cross-X to negative 2 of Team Titanium.
Okay, thank you. So how do you propose to solve national or corporate jurisdiction issues in space without the use of an
stake and not act monopolistically. Otherwise, they'll get shut down. They won't have investors and they won't make profit.
Okay. Corporations have proven themselves generally incapable of self-regulation, and national governments struggle to secure labor rights for workers in the space industry, even within their borders. How do you propose that we guarantee labor rights in space without an international framework where industry is decentralized
In
and
fact,
boundaries
I would
do not
like to refute
exist?
this by saying that international frameworks of the UN Security Council are in fact themselves unfair, whereas private companies like SpaceX have created infrastructure in developing nations, allowing people from outside their own borders to collaborate in space and infrastructure.
You mentioned in your argument that an international framework would restrict innovation by private companies. How do you explain the fact that some of the most innovative countries and corporations in the world, such as in Scandinavia, have stringent economic regulations, and in the context of other European powers, are even subject to regulation from the EU, which itself is an international body?
Can you repeat the last part of your question?
Okay, yeah. You mentioned in your argument that an international framework would restrict innovation by private companies. How do you explain the fact that some of the most innovative countries and corporations in the world, such as in Scandinavia, have stringent economic regulations, and in the context of other European powers, are even subject to regulation from the EU, which is an international?
Okay, well, first of all, Scandinavia is a nation and does not have international body, international regulations against it.
Uh, well, Scandinavia is not a single nation. It's composed of several nations, and most of them are actually part of the EU, which does enforce strict economic regulations.
Okay, even if it is part of an international
I'll just
framework, we
read one.
have examples of the biggest frameworks in world, like the IMF and the UN Security Council, which are clearly unfair and they concentrate their power to the biggest nations. So even if Scandinavia was to collaborate, only the most powerful nations within it would have the most power, which would not make a difference.
Thank you. Your time is up. Now
Okay.
we begin at 2 minutes prep time for both teams to prepare the rebuttals, and I also would like to ask you to open up your cameras, please. Now, negative 3 from Team Titanium. Please give your rebuttal in your 4 minutes of time.
Hello everyone, I am Maria and I'll be the third negative speaker today. I will offer the rebuttals of the negative side. During this debate, my teammates explained why an international body should not be in charge of the utilization of space minerals. Space mining is in its infancy, and that's why we need to enable companies to most efficiently utilize space minerals in order to best achieve universalization. Let me begin by summarizing our main contentions. We first showed that an international framework would restrict and slow down innovation as it harms competition and forces the uniformization of all companies. This leads to monopolies, higher costs, and ultimately delays in technological development, which undermines the goal of universalization. Affirmative 1, bringing up the Antarctic Treaty, proved our point because it stalled mining. Secondly, we showed how international bodies are not fair and therefore should not be left in charge. Evidence showed how they are power driven at the expense of innocent lives. Finally, we expressed how private companies improve accessibility by making their services available worldwide and by reducing costs and timeframes in comparison to the government. Affirmative 1 agreed this by waiting for a common ground for action. Let's see what the affirmative has stated. The first argument was that an international framework prevents conflicts. However, international bodies have repeatedly shown themselves to be ineffective at preventing major conflicts because they are often influenced by the very powers they are meant to regulate. They gave no evidence of conflict arising under an international framework. For example, as Negative 2 explained, one veto vote caused 48,000 deaths in Gaza, and this is not the sole example, as during the 2012-2016 Syrian war, the World Health Organization failed to enforce compliance when allies refused to supply humanitarian aid for Syria. As a result, over 400,000 people died. Competition is not a synonym for conflict. They stated that unregulated companies will create conflicts but gave no evidence. And, as argued by Negative 1, only when regulations were lifted during the pandemic, healthy competition enabled the vaccine, which according to NIH 2022 prevented 14 million deaths. They stated that an international framework ensures peace. However, the Altus Treaty failed this purpose due to lack of enforcement, allowing anti-satellite weapons to be created and tested. According to Professor Roberts from Ottawa University, the development of SAT's weapons brings into the question just how free countries that do not possess these weapons are to explore space. International bodies haven't even enforced the regulations they rely on. Their second argument was that the framework can be a flexible set of shared ideas. However, they failed to address the fact that powerful countries respect international frameworks only when it's profitable for them, and no one holds them accountable if they don't. For example, only this year, the US left both the World Health Organization and the Paris Agreement when it did no longer meet its purpose, both struggling without its support. An international framework for space mining has failed before. The Moon Agreement implied the utilization of space resources for all mankind, but failed due to non-compliance, as major spacefaring countries decided it would be more profitable to mine on their own. They gave no evidence about how equity would be achieved, as membership to the rich does not mean access, and they proposed the UN as an example when it had practices like veto who deny universalization. Their third argument was that governments do regulations better than companies. Unlike the public sector, the private sector has a sharper focus, which facilitates humanity faster. Botswana's first satellite was launched by SpaceX in 2025, providing data for the country's national development priorities. Speaker 2 implied in cross-checks that private companies are driven by profit and therefore do not care about human safety. We must disagree. Companies support universalization because they have their customers' best interest, and profit is just the incentive of development. As stated by Negative 2, seatbelts, one of the most life-saving technologies, were introduced voluntarily, not because the government demanded it. And also, SpaceX has created the reusable rockets in the same manner. Governments' frameworks are often biased, slow, more expensive, and unfair, as argued by my teammates. We are asked to consider today's resolution in the context of universalization, and while both sides may bring benefits to humanity, we showed how private sector does it faster, cheaper, and more accessible. International frameworks fail to prevent and then fail to respond, and why give them the chance of failing universalization too?
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Your time is up. Now, affirmative 3 of Chromium, give your 4-minute rebuttal.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and I'll be delivering the rebuttals and reinforcing the claim that an international body should establish a. To start, the negative team argues that private companies are faster and more innovative, and they point to SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and Blue Origin as proof. And while that's true that these companies have revolutionized launch capabilities, reduced costs, and made space more accessible, it doesn't mean that they should be allowed to mine space without any shared rules. Innovation doesn't cancel out the need for responsibility. Affirmative Speaker 1 points to the COVID-19 vaccine rollout as an example of private sector speed, but that success was built on public-private cooperation. Pfizer received nearly $2 billion in pre-purchase funding from the U.S. government, and Moderna's mRNA research was developed through public science institutions. These breakthroughs weren't just capitalism, they were structured, coordinated, and publicly supported. And that's exactly the kind of approach we need for space. Another claim which was brought up is that companies will behave fairly because they rely on public trust. But history tells a different story. In the 1920s and 30s, the The Phoebus cartel, led by light bulb manufacturers like GE and Philips, conspired to limit the lifespan of their light bulbs so people would buy more. This wasn't a global monopoly. This was a global monopoly operating for over a decade before being exposed, and they weren't stopped by public trust. They were stopped by oversight and whistleblowers. If this can happen on Earth in well-regulated markets, imagine what companies could get away with in space. They argue that international frameworks are slow, bureaucratic, and unclear. That could be true when they're poorly designed, as with the Moon Agreement of 1979. But due to the vagueness and lack of buy-in. However, the Outer Space Treaty, which was placed in 1967, has helped maintain peace in orbit for over 50 years, and the Artemis Accord, signed by over 30 nations, are another example of clear, enforceable principles guiding peaceful, transparent cooperation. Another concern is that frameworks favor wealthier nations, but in reality, not having a framework favors them even more. Without a system to ensure access, the countries with rockets and resources will simply take what they want and dominate the new space economy. A good framework can use licensing models, joint missions, or technology shared incentives to let emerging nations participate. We already do this with the International Seabed Authority for deep ocean mining, and it works. Some claim that no framework can truly be equitable, but look at the Montreal Protocol. It phased out 99% of ozone depleting chemicals and gave financial and technical support to developing companies. It's one of the most successful international agreements ever, and it worked because it was well designed and enforced with a balance of fairness and pragmatism. And the other team also warns that regulation kills innovation or makes progress more expensive. What really kills innovation is uncertainty. No investor will fund $1 billion asteroid mission if they don't know whether they'll legally own what they extract. A clear international framework provides predictability and protects companies from disputes, overlapping claims, or retaliation. It's also worth pointing out what's already happening in orbit. Right now, companies like SpaceX and OneWeb are launching tens of thousands of satellites. There are no global limits, no coordination, and no way to prevent signal interference or collisions. This kind of unregulated growth has already led to close calls and warnings from astronomers. We're watching in real time what happens if we don't act soon enough. If this chaos expands into space mining, the damage could be irreversible. Finally, opponents often mention voluntary corporate ethics, like how Volvo made seatbelt patents public. That was admirable, but Volvo is the exception, not the rule. Most companies protect their IP fiercely. In space, when the stakes are even higher, we cannot rely on good intentions alone. We need policy, not wishful thinking. In summary, private companies are essential to space exploration, but they need structure. A well designed international framework will support innovation, ensure access, and protect long term peace and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up. Now we begin a 2 minutes prep time for both teams to prepare their summaries, and please open up your cameras. Let's now hear from negative 4 for the 4 minutes titanium summary.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, honorable judges and fellow debaters. I would like to start by summarizing my key points and why we should win this debate, then go on as to claim why the other team's points are not as good as ours and do not provide universalization as effectively. I will then weigh the arguments and urge the judge to vote for the negative side's resolution. To start us off, an international body and their frameworks can easily be politically biased and taken over by the countries that already have the most power, allowing developed countries to push down developing countries into the ground and provide a second colonization of space. Such as the veto power demonstrated in the UN, that only 5 out of the 15 countries in the defense group have the capability to veto any law that they want. The United States, when talking about a ceasefire in Gaza, decided to put a veto on the ceasefire in Gaza. This led to the loss of thousands of human lives, far worse than anything else. Human life is the irreplaceable nucleus of space colonization and space development. And without human life, which international bodies do not seem to protect, we cannot achieve this. However, companies such as private companies have already saved lives beforehand and foster universalization and safety far better. Such as Pfizer and Moderna in their co-op petition with each other to provide a vaccine for COVID-19, they eventually ended up creating 2 vaccines that saved countless lives across the world. Saving lives, such as private companies, is far better than losing them through international frameworks. Free market competition also prevents a monopoly, as just given by the example of co-op petition in Pfizer and Moderna. These companies did not combine into one huge one and drive up the prices to make as much money as they could. They were profit focused and made the money they could, while also keeping their own interests in mind, and their own interests were saving lives. Saving lives is not an interest of any of these international bodies. Even if it is stated to be, they do not complete it as effectively enough for it to work. Furthermore, regulation kills progress, it doesn't kill problems. The regulation that NASA provided against spacesuits actually stopped the frameworks from being put in place and completely slowed down all regulation, completely slowed down all innovation through their excessive regulation. Once they opened up these regulations, immediately SpaceX and Deep Blue began to develop better spacesuits that led universalization and allowed other countries to send their people into space far better and easier than others. In Affirmative One's cross examination, she mentioned that what is done in space must be far better than what is done on Earth. And putting a flawed international body into space is far worse than putting the exponential development of not international bodies, of private companies into space. The historical examples of 1920s towns exploiting their workers is outdated because of just how fast private companies can drive innovation in these places. Private companies have begun to exceed their all expectations in terms of progress and being better at humanities and everything possible that could contribute to universalization, whereas international bodies have remained stuck in the past. We must choose progress over paralysis and negate the resolution that an international body should establish a framework for the utilization of space minerals. Lastly, to weigh these arguments, human life is the most important thing, and international bodies have caused thousands of deaths, such as in wars with Russia and Ukraine and the veto power over Gaza. This is completely unacceptable, and advocating for international bodies in space is just advocating for more ways to kill off people like this and should not be added. But the private companies that contribute to safety, such as Volvo and Pfizer and Moderna, are so much better. They actually provide correct ways to save human lives. NATO, the international body, caused the Ukrainian war in part
Thank you
by
so much.
having. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we'll hear from Affirmative 4 from Team Chromium, who will begin their summary in the 4 minutes allotment.
As we stand at the edge of a new space era, the choices we make today will shape not only how we mine asteroids, but who benefits and who is protected and who is left behind. The answer lies in universalization, which is the commitment to apply shared principles across all countries and companies, so that no matter where someone comes from, the standards for safety, fairness, and responsibility remain the same. That's why establishing an international framework for the utilization of space minerals is not just important, it's urgent. History has shown time and time and time again that corporations cannot be relied to protect workers when profit is at stake. Nestle's unethical formula campaigns in developing countries led to widespread infant malnutrition. Coal companies once trapped workers in company towns, paying them in script only redeemable at company owned stores. And today, SpaceX, one of the leading private actors in space, has racked up over 600 OSHA reported injuries and one death. Despite repeated safety warnings, these aren't isolated cases. They are system failures. If companies struggle to protect workers under Earth's oversight, how can we trust them to act responsibly in deep space? National laws are not uh, People claim national laws are enough, but the Ocean Gate disaster proves otherwise. A deep sea vessel imploded in international waters despite being warned by experts. No one stopped it. Why? Because there was no clear jurisdiction and national oversight failed. In space, where rescue is impossible and regulation is even murkier, we cannot afford that kind of ambiguity. A global framework can ensure a minimum safety baseline no matter where a mission launches or who's funding it. The European Union provides that when nations unify under a common system, everyone benefits, a smoother trade, shared infrastructure, and collective strength. And then, when the UK left, its economy shrank by tens of billions of pounds, 30 billion pounds to be exact. Now, imagine that in the trillion-dollar space mining industry, a framework offering favorable trade terms and legal clarity will incentivize countries to join not through force, but mutual benefit. And this is no longer hypothetical. In 2025, AstroForge launched a mission to mine platinum group metals from asteroid 2022, OB5. Carbon Plus is building in-space infrastructure for fuel and resource processing. Yet there are no global rules, no coordinated ethics, no enforcement mechanisms, and no shared expectation. If we wait for conflict to arise for the first mining accident or territorial dispute, it'll be too late. But if we act now, we can build a system rooted in fairness, one that protects workers, ensures safety, and promotes peace, and allows every nation, not just the powerful, to participate. This is what universalization looks like in practice. Shared responsibility for shared future. Let's not leave space law to the loudest voices or fastest rockets. Let's guide it together. Let's affirm the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, congratulations to both teams. Now, Judge Dudowicz, would you like a couple of minutes before you offer your feedback and the winning team?
Yeah, just give me 2 to 3 minutes and then I should have the result here.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd like to invite Francis up here to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. I am so pleased with what I see today. I am so pleased to see the audience that we have. I don't know if our debaters realize that, but we have about 65 people in the room that have been very much on the edge of their seats watching what you do, watching how you say it, and I'm sure there's been some amazement in what you have done here today. It's remarkable. This group represents a group of 8 different teams with 4 people on each team. We have had in our debates this year about 8 countries represented, and this group here today represents the countries of Canada, India, Indonesia, Romania, and the U.S. So I'm very excited about what they have done. I wanted to also introduce Apurva here. She's been a moderator in here, and could you see her? Yeah. And this debate idea, concept, started in when was that? 2016. And at that time, we were at ISDC, and we heard a speaker, Dr. Lorna Jean Edmonds, speak on this concept of universalization. And the idea was that everyone comes to the table, everyone has an opportunity to speak, everyone listens to what is being said. And if we think today about the conflicts in our world and how different our world would be if we maintain that concept, I think that would give us some hope about the future, more hope than we have right now. And hopefully, we will all resolve those conflicts soon. So I'm so happy about the result of this year. I wanted to say a little bit about what this group has been through. This year, back in December, we had about 100, a little bit over 100 applicants for the spUN debates. We asked for an intent to continue. We gave them an opportunity to go through an online course that talked about debate skills as well as the concept of universalization and what we're trying to accomplish with this debate program. And then at the end of that, we chose from that group debaters we would like to continue. They again gave us a content of involvement to continue with the debates. And from those applications and online debate program, we gave opportunities for people to be placed on teams. Again, we asked for a letter of intent. And from there, we comprised teams that nodded to gender identification, location in this world, the age, as well as the experience that the debaters had had. So in each team, we have veteran debaters as well as beginners. And that's important because we wanted our veteran debaters to have a chance to model what it's like to be on a team, and also those beginning debaters to remind the senior debaters, the veterans, of what they're going through. Because many of them were quite concerned about their performance as well as what we were asking them to do. That conversation back in 2016 started with two students, Sovik Mukherjee from India, and this lady right here, Apurva BR, also from India. We also looked at time zones and what it takes for these teams to come together. Even today, we have some people that are working very late at night and people that are working very early in the morning. That's why we have this at this particular time of the day. So I just wanted to give a congratulations to the teams. And Apurva has been working through this program alongside me. She's now a program manager for the spUN debates. And do you want to say a couple words? Sure.
I would say watching this program evolve over the years has been truly magical. And I think the debaters today, as we all clearly saw, they were both very excellent. I did not envy the judge. It's going to be hard to pick a winning team. Did a fantastic job. And before I go to the judge, can I check in with our debaters? Let's see how they're feeling. Can we have somebody from the AF team? How are you guys feeling?
Honestly, really good. I think this whole journey has been an amazing experience. And I think we've all learned so much, not only about space, not only about debate, but also about how to communicate with each other. And we realize that, yeah, we are all very different from different parts of the world, but at the same time, we are also similar because we have the same purposes and the same interests, we could say. So, yeah, I. I really loved being here and with my team and with everyone. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Alexandra. Can we have somebody from Titanium? How are you guys feeling today?
Yeah, I think it was really, really good. The whole experience collaborating with people across the world has been really smooth and efficient. It's really amazing that we can do this online now.
Awesome. Again, I will reiterate these people have gone through many challenges. The first one being trying to figure out a time to meet with very, very different time zones and very busy schedules for all of our debaters here. So, great job, everyone. Congrats once again on being finalists. And Judge Dudowitz, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready if you are.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, so with that, I'd like to echo, both Francis and Apoorva's points there, right? Great job to all debaters involved. Just I took a couple extra minutes here to come to a decision. But like I said, both of teams should be really happy with their progress that they've made all throughout this year. I've judged some previous debates as well, and so I've seen definitely the improvement of both sides, right? And all these competitors throughout these debates get better and better as each debate proceeds. So, like I said, congratulations to both sides. And so, with that, at this final spun debate, I will be voting for the affirmative team, Team Chromium. So, with that, let me just give, if that's okay. Yep. Yeah. So with that, congratulations to Team Chromium, and let me just give just some very quick 2-3 minutes of just, feedback and how I came to my decision. So yeah, for this debate, it really came down to, as all debates do, right? Does the AFs and pro sides advantages outweigh the negatives, disadvantages that are brought up. And in this debate, I do feel that the affirmative makes a stronger case for regulating both countries and private corporations and companies, and that would have more benefits versus the negatives, basically basically disadvantages of slowing down innovation and possibly international bodies making things worse. I think the affirmative does a better job, especially with their examples in like the first few constructive affirmative speeches, talking about all these examples of companies that dating back all the way to the 1800s, right, in these company towns argument. But they lead all the way to the present too, of showing how while companies can make large steps for progress and towards universalization, there's also lots of companies that'll take advantage of these situations. And I think the affirmative also proves as well that there really aren't as many huge downsides to international bodies. And there's, again, a lot of examples they show about where companies can just move their operations to other countries, dodge regulations, try to dodge that. And so an international framework is necessary to cover that. I think as well, the affirmative rebuttal speeches and concluding speeches do a good job talking about the private companies, that their innovations doesn't cancel the need for the responsibility. That again, companies will try to have monopolies. They will try to, really again take advantage of these situations, and that would be worse in an environment without the international framework. So then, for the negative, I think there are some good points argued, especially around international bodies and talking about how the UN Security Council isn't perfect, right? Large companies still dominate. I think again the affirmative does a good job, for Team Chromium there, that they do a good job talking about that without an international framework, these powerful countries and companies will dominate further. That this doesn't necessarily, solve. I think this is good defense to that argument, right? International bodies aren't perfect, and they talk about, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza that's ongoing in these situations, and international bodies haven't necessarily stopped these. But I don't know if that they prove, at least for me, and versus the AF's arguments, that international bodies actually make things worse, and again, is a disadvantage that outweighs the affirmative benefits. I think the affirmative also does a really good job answering the negative arguments. Specifically, they kind of turn the negs arguments. That was something that I noticed where they talked about. I think and the third AF speaker talked about how no private companies will actually want to invest in an unregulated environment. And this is something that kind of goes undefended, or unaddressed by the negative. That they kind of again the affirmative turns their arguments that private companies actually won't invest in an unregulated environment and without an international framework in something especially so massive, right, as space, and then very new and developing field. And then I think also that the affirmative does an excellent job really addressing some of the negatives key points. Also, for example, around private companies doing their own innovation. Specifically, the negative. I think you do a good job talking about, for example, like Pfizer and Moderna during the pandemic. So here's a perfect example, right? That the negative brings up of regulations were pulled back, and we saw this massive innovation. But I think the affirmative also, again, does a really good job kind of just neutering right that point, right, or canceling that point out by specifically saying this was also a very unique situation where worldwide governments and then also the U.S. government and obviously and then the EU and China as well, governments also played a huge part in making sure certain regulations were lifted, but then also funding these companies, checking in on them, right? So I think that's a point where like the negative again, the negative did a good job, right? Team Titanium you guys did a good job bringing a lot of these points forward. But I think at the end of this debate, stuff like that, I think the affirmative does a better job addressing those points and really countering those points and even, turning those points against you. And there just wasn't enough, I think, in the end. Like I think, for example, also like in the concluding neg speech, for you, I think there was an interesting point brought up about like NASA lifting regulations where SpaceX and Blue Origin benefited, but this came a little bit late in the debate, so I kind of would have liked to hear more points about that. Just to say, this is the first time I kind of heard. So I would have liked to have heard more throughout that about why regulation, could kill progress or could kill an industry. I think that came up in actually a cross examination as well, where an affirmative speaker asked, like, what's an example of an industry that was killed, that was really destroyed by regulation, and there really wasn't a great answer. And so again, I think at the end of this debate, the negative didn't quite prove for me, or again, at least for me personally, that regulation would kill completely space mining as an industry and outweigh the potential benefits that affirmative would have in terms of creating a stable legal environment, creating a stable regulation environment that could target any bad actors, companies, countries, etc. So I think with that, I think that is a good summary of how I came to this debate. But yeah, both sides did a great job talking about universalization and how it impacts humanity and progress going forward. Like as we've talked about, right? Tons of great research done. So great job to both sides. But I said I did end up voting for the affirmative team in the end here.
Thank you, Judge Dudowicz. Again, congratulations to both our teams for an excellent final debate. I would say please mark your calendars for Saturday, July 12th, 8 a.m. Central Time or 9 a.m. Eastern Time for the spUN Program Awards event. And thank you, everyone. Again, excellent debate, and thank you for your participation and efforts for the spUN 2025 debate tournament. These debates would not be possible without the efforts of the teams, the coaches, the judges, and the spUN organization team. We would also like to thank our virtual and in-person audience today. Thank you, everyone. Let's have a round of applause for both our teams today. And with that, goodbye, everyone.